The lobby froze when the manager's voice cracked across the marble floor. His arms were folded tight, his stare sharp with disdain. "Get out of here. This place isn't for people like you." The words struck louder than the echo of footsteps or the shuffle of luggage. Every head turned. Phone's lifted eyes widened, a collective gasp spread through the crowd. Harlan West stood alone. Plain gray shirt, worn jeans, posture, calm as stone. No briefcase, no tailored suit, nothing to announce who he really was. He didn't flinch. The insult hovered like smoke in the air, sour and heavy. A teenager near the fountain muttered, "I'm streaming this," voice shaking with anger as his phone went live. Strangers shifted uneasily, some whispering, some glaring at the staff as if all waiting for the man in front of them to break. He didn't. His name was Harlan West, founder of Horizon Grand, the chain of luxury hotels that lined skylines from New York to Los Angeles. His name carried weight in boardrooms and financial pages, but none of that followed him through the glass doors this morning. He carried no entourage, no polished leather briefcase, no tailored jacket. Instead, a faded backpack hung loosely from his shoulder, the seams tired from years of use. His sneakers, once white, had dulled to gray, frayed at the edges. The shirt he wore was plain cotton, the kind anyone could buy at a discount store. To every eye in the lobby, he looked like a traveler on a budget, not the man who had designed the very architecture they were standing in. Conversations resumed around him. A couple near the check-in desk glanced his way and then dismissed him. No one noticed. No one cared. And in that invisibility lay the test he had come for. Years earlier, before the boardrooms and headlines, Harlan had scrubbed plates in hotel kitchens where steam choked the air. He had hauled luggage twice his size up staircases because elevators were reserved for guests. He had balanced trays through banquet halls where servers were invisible until they made a mistake. He knew exactly how it felt to be measured and dismissed by appearance alone. Those nights when he was sent to eat in back corridors when tips were tossed at him without eye contact shaped him. The sting never left, but it forged something steadier than bitterness. Horizon Grand had risen from those nights a promise that service would never mean servitude, that respect was not a premium reserved for a few. Yet promises fracture when no one is watching. That was why he stood here stripped of status, letting his own staff decide what they really believed about people who didn't fit their image of wealth. He crossed the lobby with the quiet step of someone who belonged, yet the silence that followed him told another story. The doorman glanced once, then shifted his eyes as if the man didn't exist. At the counter, the receptionist's gaze slid from his sneakers to his shirt, lingering with a curl of her lip. No greeting, no warm phrase rehearsed for guests, only the hum of computers and the shuffle of papers. The air itself felt colder, as if hospitality had been suspended for anyone outside their expectations. Couples nearby were greeted with polished smiles, luggage whisked away without asking. When Harlan reached the desk, nothing changed. The receptionist's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffened, and the space between them filled not with welcome, but with quiet rejection. He felt the weight of their judgment pressing on the simplest fact he didn't look like he belonged in a place he had built. Harlan placed his hands lightly on the polished counter. His voice was even almost quiet. "I have a reservation. Penthouse suite. The name is West." The words hung there like a challenge to gravity. For a heartbeat silence. Then the desk clerks broke into short derisive laughter. One of them leaned to another, whispering just loud enough, "Penthouse dressed like that." A smirk spread across their faces as if they had uncovered a joke too obvious to hide. Guests nearby raised their eyebrows, curious, leaning closer to hear what would happen next. The air thickened with the cruel humor of those convinced they were right. Behind the counter, the manager narrowed his eyes, moving closer with a measured step, his gaze crawling over Harlan's plain shirt and worn sneakers. The name, West, rolled in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't yet place, but the disbelief on his face made clear one thing: they had already judged him guilty of not belonging. Harlan slid a black card across the counter, steady as stone. The manager picked it up between two fingers as though it might stain him. He lifted his chin, projecting his voice so every corner of the lobby could hear, "This looks fake." A ripple of unease stirred the guest standing nearby. The receptionist, lips tight with disdain, pressed a button under the desk. A red light blinked as security was summoned. Harlan didn't move. He simply stood, expression unreadable, while the card disappeared from view. In the corner, a young employee froze. Elena, her badge pinned crookedly on her blouse, glanced at the computer screen. She saw the reservation listed. She saw his name. but her eyes darted between the truth glowing on her monitor and the humiliation unraveling in front of her. Her jaw clenched. Fear kept her silent, but doubt burned in her eyes. The lobby waited the moment stretched thin, the insult unchallenged. The sound of hard soles striking marble cut through the murmur. Security approached broad shoulders, blocking light as they advanced. Guests shifted aside, whispers multiplying. A middle-aged woman frowned, leaning toward her husband. "They're treating him like a criminal." The words carried, pulling more eyes to the scene. The manager raised a hand, commanding with false authority, "This isn't a place for frauds." The security guard's stare was cold, unyielding, already scanning Harlan as if a crime had been proven. Harlan remained still, hands loose at his sides, calm against the storm brewing around him. Across the room, the teenager who had been recording whispered, "Streaming now," and with a swipe of his thumb, the story leapt into the online world. Notifications began to ping, comments flashing across the live feed. In the lobby, the tension was physical, a current tightening with every breath. People leaned closer, pulled not by spectacle but by outrage that demanded to see what would unfold next. Elena's fingers hovered above the keyboard as the screen refreshed. There it was, West Harlan. Penthouse suite. Confirmed. The text blinked like a warning light no one else would see. Her chest tightened. She pressed her lips together, pulse thudding in her ears. The truth was right in front of her, undeniable. She opened her mouth, but before a sound could escape, the manager's eyes cut toward her. His tone sliced the air. "Stay out of this if you value your job." Heat flushed her face and her shoulders locked. Around her, the lobby hummed with tension, voices rising as guests whispered, but she remained silent, trapped between the reality she knew and the authority that silenced her. Just beyond the counter, Harlan stood motionless, gaze steady, unreadable. He offered no protest, no plea, only calm that seemed to challenge the entire room to question what they were seeing. The manager snapped open a drawer behind the counter and pulled out a steel safe no bigger than a shoebox. He held up Harlan's card for everyone to see, then slid it inside. The metallic slam of the door echoed through the lobby, sharp and final. "Company property until verified," he declared, voice swollen with arrogance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man in a suit shouted, "That's theft." Plain and simple. Dozens of phones lifted higher, cameras zooming in on the lock, recording every second. The weight of the act pressed into the air. This was no longer rudeness, no longer suspicion. It was confiscation, staged humiliation, the theft of dignity in real time. Elena's stomach lurched, her nails biting into her palm, but she said nothing. Around her, the disbelief hardened into outrage faces, turning, sharp voices rising. The click of the safe was louder than any word spoken. On screens across the world, the feed ignited. Comments raced faster than they could be read. Unbelievable, fire them now. Name this hotel, notifications stacked like falling bricks. The teenager by the fountain grinned grimly, camera fixed on the counter, knowing he was broadcasting injustice, raw and unedited. In the lobby, the manager straightened his back chin, lifted, basking in authority he no longer owned. He ignored the phones, ignored the whispers, convinced that control was still his. But the atmosphere betrayed him. Guests weren't looking at him with respect, they looked at him as though he had already failed. Behind the desk, Elena's hands clenched until her knuckles whitened. Her eyes darted to Harlan, who stood unmoving, serene, almost daring the storm to grow. He had not shouted, had not demanded, had not defended. That silence was louder than the crowd, pulling every gaze back to him. Something was building unstoppable. From behind the desk, a junior staffer stepped forward. Her expression was sharp, her voice cutting through the lobby. She reached for Harlan's arm, her grip firm, her warning colder than the marble floor beneath them. "Leave now before I call the police." The touch was small but explosive. The crowd erupted. A dozen voices shouted at once, "Don't touch him!" The outcry ricocheted across the space, strangers suddenly united in outrage. Phones tilted, capturing the moment frame by frame. Near the elevators, a young man posted the clip straight to Reddit with a caption of only 3 words, "Happening right now." Within minutes, notifications flared the post, surging into thousands of views. In the lobby itself, the tension thickened, fury spreading like a contagion. Harlan didn't move. He let her hand rest briefly on his sleeve before she pulled back, startled by the force of the crowd's reaction. The humiliation was complete, but the storm had only just begun. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena couldn't bear it any longer. Her voice cracked the still air. His name is in the system. I saw it myself." The confession struck like glass shattering. Every head turned toward her. For a second, hope flickered. Then the manager spun eyes, blazing fury spilling in every syllable. "Be quiet if you want to keep your job." The words lashed through the lobby, cruel and absolute. Helena froze her hands, trembling, but she didn't retract her claim. Guests looked between her and Harlan, faces stiff with disbelief. The weight of her defiance hung heavy in the room. The crowd sensed the line had been crossed. Not only had they seen arrogance, but now suppression of the truth itself. The stillness was electric, each breath heavy with expectation of what would come next. Harlan remained unmoved, his gaze steady, his silence more powerful than any protest. The manager, rattled but unwilling to bend, lunged toward the intercom. He slammed his hand on the button. A shrill tone filled the lobby before his voice thundered from the overhead speakers, "Unauthorized guest. All staff disengage immediately." The words reverberated across marble and glass, mechanical and merciless like an order of exile. Gasps broke out among the guests. A girl near the staircase whispered, horrified, "They're really doing this." She lifted her phone higher, live comments spilling across her screen in disbelief. In the lobby, dozens of devices rose at once, lenses and microphones capturing every flicker of the unfolding scene. It was no longer rumor or suspicion, it was documented fact multiplied through every digital feed. The announcement didn't silence the crowd. It inflamed them. Murmurs turned to open condemnation, people shaking their heads, voices sharp, "This isn't right." In that instant, the hotel wasn't just a lobby. It was a stage, and the performance was collapsing in full view. Near the counter, a man in a navy suit lifted his phone and turned it toward his own face. His tone was steady, but his eyes flashed indignation. "For clarity, I am watching a paying guest humiliated after giving his name card and ID." The words cut through the murmur like a blade. Guests nearby nodded, emboldened, their own phones rising higher. The manager stiffened, sweat pricking his temple. His authority, once unshakable, faltered in the glare of witnesses. Still, he forced his voice through clenched teeth, repeating the only shield he had left. "This is policy. This is policy." The phrase rang hollow, stripped of power by the reality streaming across countless screens. The man in the suit tilted his phone, catching the manager's face as he spoke, the cracks of doubt visible even as he clung to the script. The crowd no longer believed him. The words that once commanded now revealed only weakness. A gray-haired woman whispered to no one in particular, "He's so calm." The observation rippled through the lobby like a secret suddenly spoken aloud. Strangers turned their heads and nodded their agreement, uniting them without words. Amid the hush, Helena pushed herself away from the counter. Each step toward Harlan was small but seismic. She stopped at his side, her posture straight. Her gaze locked on the manager with unflinching resolve. The gesture seemed simple, almost silent, but it struck like thunder. Guests gasped. Phones shook in their hands as they captured the moment. For the first time, someone from behind the desk stood, not with the staff, but with the man they tried to erase. The image anchored itself instantly, two figures shoulder to shoulder, one accused, one defiant. The fragile balance shifted. What had been one man's humiliation was becoming a collective reckoning, sparked by a single act of courage. The manager's voice cracked as desperation bled into rage. "I'll call the police right now." His threat rang loud, but the weight of it seemed lighter than before. Harlan finally raised his head, meeting the man's eyes with calm steel. "Go ahead," he said. 2 words, nothing more, but the effect was immediate. The air thickened, guests whispering to one another, "He's not afraid." Their eyes widened, astonishment mixing with admiration. The manager faltered his shoulders, tightening his voice, shrinking even as he tried to repeat the threat. For the first time it was clear he was unsure. Authority had slipped through his grasp, not stolen, but surrendered the moment fear showed on his face. Harlan didn't move, didn't press. He only stood calm as ever, and that calmness mocked the fury that had tried to undo him. The shift was undeniable. The power had begun to change hands. The assistant clerk's voice cracked across the lobby. "This man is a fraud." The declaration was loud, decisive, meant to drown the doubts circling the room. But at that very moment, the live stream feed cut to the safe. Its steel door closed tight, the black card sealed inside. The image was damning, undeniable. Thousands of viewers poured fury into the scrolling comments. They just stole his card. This is evidence of theft. Phones across the lobby replayed the same image, the metallic echo of the safe now preserved forever. The manager's shoulders stiffened, a flicker of fear rippling across his face before he caught himself. He tried to stand taller, but his composure had cracked. Elena lifted her head, turned deliberately toward one of the recording phones, and held her gaze steady. Her silence spoke louder than words. She had seen everything, and she would not pretend otherwise. The cameras caught it, and the truth was now irreversible. The shuffle of wheels broke the tension. A silver-haired woman pulled her suitcase forward, stepping directly between Harlan and the staff. Her voice carried a calm authority. "You will not lay a hand on this man." Gasps scattered through the lobby as two more guests followed, then a third forming a loose circle around him. Their stance was simple, yet unyielding. The manager's face paled, his certainty eroding under the weight of strangers willing to stand against him. For the first time, he looked small. Elena moved closer until her shoulder brushed Harlan's. Her fear had burned away, replaced by clarity. She faced the manager without flinching, as if daring him to act against them all. Around them, murmurs swelled into open approval. Cameras swung to capture the impromptu line of defense. The shift was undeniable, no longer one man against a staff, but a guest shielded by those who had seen enough. The manager narrowed his eyes, his voice thin with uncertainty. "Who are you?" The words trembled, no longer thunder, but a fraying thread. Harlan raised his head at last, gaze fixed and piercing his silence heavier than any reply. He didn't blink. He didn't move. The quiet became unbearable. Every phone in the room tilted upward, screens glowing as they captured the moment. Viewers online hammered questions. Who is he? Why isn't he afraid? In the lobby itself, not a chair creaked, not a bag shifted. Guests leaned forward, their breath caught, waiting for the strike they could feel building. Harlan's stare did not waver, the kind of silence that promised an ending. Even the staff behind the counter froze, unsettled by the calm they could not shake. The atmosphere pressed down taut as a wire about to snap. Something irreversible hovered one breath away. Harlan stepped forward, slow but deliberate, until the space between him and the counter was gone. His voice carried across the marble floor, each syllable crisp. "This lobby belongs to me." The words landed with a weight no insult could touch. Silence swallowed the room. Elena's lips parted, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Phones tilted higher, streaming every detail. The manager's jaw slackened, his face draining pale as though the ground had shifted under him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Online comments detonated. "He owns it." CEO confirmed, screens lit up with shock and exhilaration. In the lobby, whispers rippled through the guests, some gasping, others repeating the revelation aloud as if needing to hear it twice. The man they had seen, mocked, accused, and manhandled was not a stranger. He was the very name carved into the stone outside the building. The vibration of Harlan's phone cut the stillness. He answered without lowering his gaze. A clipped voice came through system, ready. One command. Harlan gave a single nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. In an instant, the manager's login credentials blinked out. Across the counter, 3 employee badges, as the junior clerks and the guards, flashed red lifeless. The electronic beep that followed was hollow final, impossible to ignore. The manager snatched his card, swiped again. Another beep, another denial. The silence that followed cracked open with applause. First a few hands, then dozens, until the sound filled the entire lobby. The release was tidal, every guest who had watched injustice unfold now watching accountability strike with precision. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, her fear dissolving into awe. Harlan remained still, eyes steady as the tide of relief swept through the crowd. Applause rolled into cheers. A man near the fountain pumped his fist and shouted, "Justice." The word echoed from the walls, picked up and repeated until it thundered from every corner. The manager's face blazed, red veins sharp at his temple. He slammed his palm on the counter, spitting rage. "You can't do this. You have no authority." His trembling hand grabbed his badge, swiping it through the scanner with frantic speed. The screen flickered, then glowed with the final humiliation. Access denied. Gasps erupted, followed by a wave of laughter, sharp and unrestrained. Phones zoomed closer lenses, capturing his collapse. Guests pointed, not in cruelty but in triumph, their recordings streaming to thousands more. The manager's authority, once absolute, now mocked, was dissolving in real time, stripped away by the same system he had weaponized. Every denial beep was a nail in the coffin of his control. Harlan turned toward Elena, his expression calm, his tone carrying no theatrics. "You will assume the role of acting manager." For a moment, she didn't breathe. Her hands trembled as the words sank in her eyes, glassing over. A tear slipped down her cheek, unhidden. The lobby erupted again, not in outrage but in applause, sharper and louder than before. Guests cheered openly, clapping not only for him, but for her. The former manager stood rooted in place, face blank with disbelief. His authority had been erased in front of strangers, replaced by someone he had once silenced. Phones caught the moment, Harlan stepping aside so Elena could stand at the front, her presence now a symbol of reversal. The weight of humiliation crushed the old guard while the power of recognition lifted the new. In that instant, the entire room understood change was not promised. It was happening. From the crowd, a man raised his voice. "I filed a complaint here last year." No one ever answered, his words cut like a match to dry tinder. Another voice followed quickly. "Same here." Ignored every time. Murmurs grew into a chorus, dozens of grievances surfacing at once, long buried, but now undeniable. The manager's face flushed purple, his eyes darting, but he couldn't silence them anymore. Harlan lifted a hand, steadying the storm. "Every word you speak today will be investigated fully." The statement calmed the air, but only slightly, because the truth was already out. The complaint system had failed them all. Guests nodded firmly, some sighing in relief, others shaking their heads at wasted time. What had been whispered privately now blazed in public, with the man responsible forced to hear every accusation. The lobby was no longer a lobby. It was a courtroom. Beyond the marble and glass, the storm went digital. The live stream crossed 100,000 viewers' comments, rolling so fast they blurred into a wall of outrage and triumph. "Coolest CEO I've ever seen." "Fired on the spot." "Name this hotel." Hashtags erupted, spreading the clip to every corner of the internet. Within minutes, an online news channel picked up the video headlines flashing across feeds. In the lobby, the tension had broken, replaced by a strange, calm applause, fading murmurs, steadying, yet phones still raised, documenting each second. Harlan stood unmoved at the center, his posture relaxed as though this moment had been rehearsed in silence years ago. He did not bask in victory. He let the noise swell around him, the validation flooding in waves, because he knew the point wasn't spectacle. It was truth exposed, magnified now beyond any attempt to bury it. The manager's voice cracked desperation, spilling into accusation. "You set us up." This was a trap. His words rang hollow, too sharp, too frantic. Harlan's reply was steady, unflinching, and on. "I walked in as any guest would. You built the pit yourselves and you fell into it." The air froze. Guests turned, watching the manager's face lose all certainty. His mouth opened, then closed, but nothing came out. The silence was merciless. A man near the front spoke loudly, his voice clear enough for every phone to capture. "He's absolutely right." Heads nodded in agreement, the verdict unanimous. The weight shifted fully now. What had been framed as an issue of suspicion was revealed as abuse of power, plain and simple. The manager hunched slightly, the collapse of his authority no longer gradual, but complete. His words had condemned him, and Harlan's calm had sealed the judgment. Elena moved toward the safe, her hands steady this time. She entered the code, and with a soft mechanical click, the door swung open. Inside, the black credit card lay untouched, a symbol of everything stolen and denied. She lifted it carefully, as if restoring more than property, and walked it back to Harlan. He accepted it with a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of trust returned. Applause rose again, echoing against marble and glass, but this time the sound carried relief rather than outrage. The junior clerk who had once grabbed his arm lowered her head, cheeks burning, and slipped quietly into the background, no longer able to meet anyone's eyes. The scene was complete. What had been taken was restored. What had been silenced was now visible. The balance had shifted fully, and everyone present could feel it. Harlan turned toward one of the cameras streaming live, his expression calm, but his words cutting sharp. "This is not just about me. This is a reminder for the entire service industry. No one has the right to belittle a guest because of appearances." The message landed with force, echoing beyond the walls of the lobby into thousands of screens across the country. Online comments exploded. "Truth. Finally, someone said it." Guests in the lobby nodded firmly, some lifting their hands in approval, others calling out their agreement. The statement shifted the tone once more. What began as humiliation had transformed into testimony, a line drawn not just for this hotel, but for all who might watch. The cameras captured his face, unwavering, the embodiment of accountability. For those present, it felt less like a speech and more like a pledge sealed in real time. The three dismissed employees shuffled toward the glass doors, their heads bowed, steps heavy. No one blocked them. No one spoke in their defense. The lobby that once served as their stage now turned into a gauntlet of silent judgment. Guests tracked their every move with eyes colder than stone. A woman near the lounge muttered under her breath, "Serves them right." Another guest, arms folded, shook his head. They brought this on themselves. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Each glance, each murmur pressed down harder than any punishment. Phones followed their retreat, recording the slow unraveling of arrogance into disgrace. At the threshold, they hesitated, perhaps waiting for sympathy, but none came. Not a hand reached out. Not a single voice softened. The doors opened with a hiss, and they walked into the daylight, stripped of power their reputations left behind on the marble floor. When the doors closed behind them, the air shifted. Elena stood firmly beside Harlan, her eyes bright, her shoulders squared as though carrying a new weight. Harlan spoke quietly, but the authority in his voice filled the space. "Reform begins today." The sentence drew every ear, every gaze. Elena nodded, her voice steady, no trace of fear left. "Yes, sir." The tension that had gripped the lobby gave way to relief. Guests stepped forward, some extending their hands to Harlan, others to Elena offering congratulations and support. Smiles cracked open where moments before there had been suspicion and outrage. The applause that followed wasn't wild. It was warm, the kind that signaled approval and belief. In the place where humiliation had stained the air, hope now took its first breath. The lobby no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. Harlan turned slowly, taking in every face, every phone still raised to capture history as it unfolded. His gaze lingered on the sea of screens, then lifted to the crowd itself. "This is the day we change," he declared, his tone steady and resonant. "And this is only the beginning." The words echoed through the hall, sharp and unyielding, etching themselves into memory. For a beat, silence held them all, the gravity of the moment pressing in. Then the room erupted once more, applause shaking the chandeliers, cheers rolling across the marble. Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides, not in anger but in conviction, her stance a silent vow to carry the weight of what had been entrusted to her. Phones caught every second, transmitting not just images but the pulse of transformation. The statement was more than a conclusion, it was a call to the future. The applause had barely faded when Harlan gave his next command. "Every complaint from the last 18 months, review them all." The words struck with the precision of a gavel. Within minutes, the directive spread through the internal system, flashing on staff terminals across the property. Employees who remained loyal straightened, ready to comply. Elena stood beside him, her notepad in hand, accepting her role as direct supervisor of the review. Guests who overheard the order broke into applause again, not for spectacle, but for accountability. For too long, their voices had been ignored. Now the promise of investigation felt like vindication. The old hierarchy was gone, replaced by a leader who had exposed rot instead of hiding it. In that moment, trust began to rebuild, not through slogans or speeches, but through the weight of real action. The reform was no longer an idea. It was underway. As the crowd thinned, a middle-aged traveler stepped forward, clutching his suitcase handle. His voice was soft, but it carried, "Thank you for not walking away from this." Harlan met his gaze, gave a small nod. "This is only the beginning." The man smiled, faintly, relief washing over his features. Around them, other guests nodded, some murmuring agreement. A young woman lifted her phone to record the exchange, uploading it within seconds with the caption, "CEO stands up for fairness." Online comments poured in, echoing the sentiment, "Respect justice leadership." The message spread faster than the incident itself, framed not as scandal, but as reform. Guests who had once been silent now became messengers, choosing their side openly. What started as a confrontation had transformed into a movement gathering strength both inside and beyond the hotel walls. 3 months later, Horizon Grand bore little resemblance to the place where silence once masked contempt. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still cast golden light, but the atmosphere had shifted. Elena, no longer tentative, stood confidently at the front desk, greeting guests with genuine warmth. Her presence radiated change, proof that courage had been rewarded rather than punished. Visitors entered to find not suspicion, but welcome. Near the entrance, a polished plaque reflected the light, "Respect first." The words etched in bold letters were impossible to miss. Guests paused to read it, some even taking photos as a reminder of what the hotel now stood for. The staff followed suit, interactions reshaped by training and accountability. What had been an infamous scandal was now the foundation of a transformation. Horizon Grand had become a living statement. Respect was not decoration. It was policy. Weeks later, in a grand hall filled with executives from across the country, Harlan stepped to the podium. His attire was simple, but the silence that met him was heavy with expectation. "There is no place for prejudice in hospitality," he declared. The words landed with the force of conviction, not performance. One by one, the audience rose, applause swelling into a standing ovation that shook the room. Outside those walls, headlines raced across the press. CEO redefines hospitality after Seattle scandal. Newspapers carried his image on the front page, his calm profile beneath bold titles, "The Man Who Rewrote the Rules of Service." What had begun as humiliation in a single lobby was now retold as a pivot point for an entire industry. For the first time in years, Horizon was not in the news for luxury or profits, but for leadership with conscience. During a leadership summit, a former employee from another branch raised his hand, voice steady but raw. "We were told to treat certain guests differently." It wasn't just Seattle. The room went still. Eyes turned toward Harlan, waiting. His response was immediate. "Investigate now." Within hours, an internal task force was activated. Complaints buried in archives resurfaced, directives from past managers scrutinized line by line. The reform spread across every Horizon property, uprooting practices that had quietly thrived for years. Media outlets seized the story. The Hotel Revolution, one headline read. Analysts compared it to landmark moments in corporate reform, proof that accountability could be demanded and delivered. The scale stunned even loyal employees who realized their company's reputation was no longer built on glamour, but on justice. What began as a scandal had become a cleansing fire, and Harlan was at its center. The next step was not public, but deeply personal. Guests who had once filed ignored complaints began receiving envelopes stamped with Horizon's crest. Inside, a short letter carried Harlan's signature. "You deserve respect." Nothing less. No slogans, no excuses, just a recognition long overdue. For many, the words landed harder than polished campaigns ever had. A woman who had been dismissed at check-in posted her letter online, tears visible in her photo. A man who once slept in his car after being denied service shared his captioned, "This apology means more than a refund." Within days, screenshots of the letters spread, widely praised as an act of sincerity in an industry better known for form letters. Commenters agreed. This apology is worth more than 1,000 advertisements. Through humility, Harlan restored what money could never buy: trust. Months later, Sophie and Jacob, the two travelers whose live stream had ignited a storm, were invited to speak at Horizon's leadership conference. Jacob adjusted the mic, his words plain but piercing. "We just didn't put our phones down." The audience erupted in applause, the phrase echoing beyond the hall, picked up by journalists and trending online within hours. "Don't put your phone down when you see injustice" became a rallying cry, printed on posters, quoted in articles shared by thousands. What had begun as a spontaneous act of witness now stood as proof that ordinary people could hold power accountable. Sophie added softly, "We only did what was right." Yet it was enough to shift the tide of an entire industry. Elena stepped to the stage at Horizon headquarters, her voice clear, her stance steady. "From this day forward, no one has to stay silent." For a moment, the room was still. Then a chorus rose, young employees shouting in unison, "That's right." The hall shook with the sound of collective conviction. In the back, Harlan watched quietly, a faint smile crossing his face. He didn't need to speak. Elena's words had already sealed the future. Around her, faces lit with a mix of pride and determination, as if a new chapter had been written, not by orders from above, but by courage from within. What began as one man's quiet test had become a movement owned by everyone. The next day, Harlan stood before reporters, his words measured and final. "Service does not begin with a smile. It begins with respect." The line spread like fire, quoted in headlines, posted on walls, etched onto plaques in every Horizon hotel. Guests paused to read it. Employees carried it like a promise. Media outlets named him the CEO of fairness. What began as humiliation in a single lobby had ended as a legacy for an entire industry. The story closed, but its echo remained, urging all who heard it to remember that respect was not optional. It was the foundation.